morning. Thanks for joining me on the Meg Ellefson Show, or rejoining me in hour 2 of the show. I am delighted that you have chosen to do so. My guest this morning from the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. I always say they're the good guys that are fighting on behalf of our liberties and freedom here in Wisconsin. They're going beyond the state, though, and with regard to this case. Founder of the great organization, Will, and Chief Counsel Rick Essenberg. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. So I know we had a really interesting chat, and it was so short. We'll have to continue it off air at some point,
Sure.
but because we ran out of time. And I always say sometimes my best conversations happen off air. But and I'm very intrigued actually. So we'll continue that. But I invited you on the show today to talk about this race discrimination case in Texas. And I mean, we can talk about, just this week, I just got another one of your newsletters. And for our listeners, if you are interested in following all of the work that Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty does, will-law.org, you can subscribe to their Will Call. And I mean, you can get press releases, etc. But I have to say from the bottom of my heart, Rick, thank you so much for all that your organization does. I mean, it's sort of like, we're all in this together. It's not a village, but we're all in this together in this conservative fight, this conservative battle to preserve our freedoms and liberties. And I'm so grateful for all that your organization does.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And as I always say, I've reached the point in life where a good part of my job is taking credit for the hard work that younger people do. And I guess I'm about to do that again now this morning. So.
Well, I can't wait to have that same luxury myself.
Well, just wait. It'll happen.
Well, and I mean, honestly, it Will would not have existed without you. So let's at least acknowledge that. But yes, and I know that one of your attorneys, and I've gotten to know many of the attorneys with Will, and I can't even tell you which one is my favorite because they're all wonderful, and I'm not just saying that. It's true. Dan Lennington, I know, is involved in this lawsuit with regard to race discrimination. Let's talk about it. I'm not, I'm sure some of our listeners are not familiar with the case.
Yeah. So this is just. There have been battles about affirmative action and providing preferences based upon race for a long time. I mean, is that something that gets us past racial discrimination, or is it something that just aggravates it? We think that it will aggravate it. We think that it's an intrinsic wrong and it's unconstitutional, and it's very, very important for public policy and government to be race neutral. So particularly after the switch over to the Biden administration, there was I think an increase in the willingness of government to explicitly grant preferences on the basis of race. And so this is about a program down in Behar County, Texas. That's San Antonio, for those of you who aren't familiar with the area. And there's a program down there for aid to small business organizations, and it has an explicit racial preference. There's not enough money to help everybody, so they have a scoring system, and a scoring system gives you extra points if it's a woman-owned business or a minority-owned business, and both of those things raise constitutional problems. And so our client is a little company called Digital Desk. They make educational software, and they're being disadvantaged in their application for assistance under this small business program on the basis of race and sex. And so we have filed a lawsuit down in federal court in the San Antonio area in order to have that set aside. We won a similar case in Texas last month. I don't know how they're going to defend this one, but the problem is that with affirmative action, we've now reached the point where there are just going to be a lot of battles and skirmishes because I think the court has gone a long way, the Supreme Court of the United States, that is, has gone a long way to make clear that these programs are unconstitutional. But unfortunately, there are people that simply don't want to learn that lesson. They are committed to them. They don't want to give up. And that requires enforcement, and enforcement means lawsuits. And this is our latest down in Texas.
Well, and have to say that we have to remain, as individual citizens, we have to remain vigilant with regard to the actions of even our local governments. Because despite the fact that this landmark decision about affirmative action took place, that doesn't mean, this is a great example of it, it's still going on, despite the fact that it's no longer, I don't know, would you say it's no longer law? It's no longer acceptable practice in with regard to any. Uh,
Yeah, I don't think it ever has been. I think if you look at what the court has done in most contexts, it's been pretty consistent over the last, almost 50 years in saying, look, you simply can't grant preferences based on race. You might be able to take race into account if an individual or a identifiable group of people have been subjected to racial discrimination. You can provide a remedy for that, but you can't simply say, look, we want equity, we want racial proportionality, and therefore we're going to grant racial preferences. But there remains a great deal of commitment to that approach. It's not lawful, and this is why we have as much litigation about it as we do.
So, I didn't, honestly, my husband and I, for the first time, went to Texas this last spring, and for whatever reason, it was one of his high school friends that lives in San Antonio. That's where we ended up, and, I didn't even realize at the time when we were there, it's one of the 7 largest city in America. And
it's huge.
Yeah, and the fact that, it's going on in a city as big as San Antonio means that we have to, again, the message is we have to be vigilant even in our own individual communities. And as aggravating as it is and sometimes discouraging, because it's kind of like, I think our natural inclination as conservatives is to just, we want government to leave us alone. But in order for us to get them to leave us alone, we have to get engaged and involved. And it's really ever vigilance on the part of every individual citizen.
That's right. And unfortunately, and we're going to see this in college admissions now after the Harvard and North Carolina decision that we had at the end of last month. All indications are that colleges are set to try to resist this in various ways. And so I think that this is the analogy I use is that in that area, what's happened here is that the people that want to enforce the Constitution have sort of secured the beach at Normandy, but now they have to keep fighting in order to end the conflict. And it's unfortunate that has to be the way it is, but sometimes that's just how things go.
So whenever you're over the target, I think you become an object of the left's ire. And I want to ask you, do they ever try to mess with Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty? Are they ever targeting you or making your life more miserable because of all of the work that you have done on behalf of liberty and freedom?
Well, sometimes family tells me to stay off Twitter. I don't, but sometimes I go on there, and it's like I'm called everything but a child of God. And I think the important thing for us is to try to stay committed to the principles that have caused us to fight for these things that we believe in. And a lot of times I hear from fellow conservatives, look, the other side doesn't fight fair. You shouldn't fight fair either. The other side doesn't care about principles. You shouldn't care about principles either. I disagree with all of that. I think it's important for us to realize that there are certain things that we're about, and this concept of race neutrality and treating everybody based upon the content of their character and not the color of their skin or whatever their gender happens to be. I think that those important principles that really are not compromisable by us, and we have to stick to that. And I think that we do best when we try to make calm, rational, forceful to be sure, Even get a little humor in there when you can. But we need to be the people that we believe ourselves and that we desire to be, and so we try to stay above the fray. But yeah, sometimes it's difficult. I know.
Yeah, well, Twitter is, I mean, thankfully, I hate to say because social media, I don't really want to applaud much of what goes on social media, but thankfully, Elon Musk believes in free speech, and that's why he purchased that platform. And I mean, that's at least one place where conservatives can feel like we have a voice. I mean, often it's difficult, but I want to talk about your project, this equality under law. Can you describe what the objective is and
Well, sure. This is just really kind of a formalized project that we have that seeks to advance, these principles of equality. And so, this is something that I've been interested in for a long time. When I was in private practice, I handled a lot of, like back in the Neo-Pleistocene era, I handled a lot of cases like this. And so we thought that, look, we feel that there's a need both in the state of Wisconsin and nationally to develop an expertise in this area on behalf of the movement. We're going to do that. And, you mentioned Dan. Dan has been instrumental for us, Dan Lennington, in getting this thing going. He's incredibly energetic. I'll call him a young man because I can. I don't know that he would call himself that anymore, but I think he is. And he's done a great job. And this is our effort to try to promote this the best that we can. And I think in the last couple of years we've become one of the more active organizations, not certainly in Wisconsin, but nationally as well in this area.
so speaking of cases outside of Wisconsin, can you talk a little bit about I mean, I guess I'm sort of curious about this Nashville Shooter Manifesto. I know that you're representing a client that has asked to see the manifesto, and in your opinion, why do you think that they will not release it?
Well, I think that they're, and, to some extent, I get it that when there are these mass shootings, a lot of people try to politicize them. So if it's somebody who is, on the right who does it, or if it's somebody who's on the left who does it, or somebody who has connections to sort of more radical variants of Islam, they try to make a broader political point. Sometimes, I think almost all the time, that's probably inappropriate. What we have is a nut job who uses some type of cause or ideology or religion to advance, usually his nuttiness. Here, it would be, of course, a mistake to think that because somebody is, transgender or experiences gender dysphoria, that they're going to go out and shoot people. Of course, that isn't the case. But I think that since we have developed a practice of looking at the reasons that somebody says they did something, anytime they leave a manifesto or they leave a record on social media, we should really, really do that across the board. And sometimes by doing that, we can learn something about what drives people to take this really extraordinary step and do something that most people of any type would never do. And so for some reason, this is being held back. We and some others are trying to get it. Eventually, it'll come out. But it's been a bit of a slog.
Well, and I mean, I guess I just have to hypothesize that it doesn't lend a positive light to the current narrative regarding the transgender movement, and I suspect that if it were a conservative that had been, or if it was a MAGA Republican that had been
Yeah, it would
involved
have
in
been
this,
out. It would have been out already.
right, and
And
it's dropped
yeah,
essentially.
and it's a mistake because, of course, when you try to withhold something, people do speculate. People don't just, go away and not think about it. They speculate, well, what's in there? Why are they hiding it? And, I think it's better just let's get everything out in the open. Let's find out what happened here. And the point here is not to blame any particular group. The person to blame for the shooting is the person that pulled the trigger. Mm-hmm. But we try to understand these inexplicable things as best as we can, and it doesn't help when we engage in this selective hiding of the ball, and that shouldn't happen. And ultimately, I think it'll all come out, but it's apparently going to take some doing.
Do you anticipate that? I mean, that it's that. I mean, I guess I'm cynical now about it. Is even if it were to be released, I don't anticipate that the mainstream media is going to cover it in any kind of conclusive way. I mean, I think that they'll do what they do best, and it's sweep it under the rug if it doesn't provide any kind of positive light for their, the narrative du jour.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's why we have people like you, so that somebody will cover it. But I think that I can't tell you you're wrong. I actually agree with you. I think that there will be an attempt on the part of some media outlets to avoid that.
Yeah, well, and I did see too that your client had received death threats from someone about this, and I mean the irony of all of it in light of the fact that he's just looking for transparency, and I mean I think too. I mean, this is sort of a tangent, but I think that it is ironic in a way too that really the two people that are standing out in my mind, at least recently, in support of freedom of speech aren't conservatives. Elon Musk and Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, well, I think that it's important, I think, for people not to be afraid of the truth. And when you try to hide things, first of all, it doesn't work anyway. I mean, I was 7 years old when President Kennedy was shot. It's 60 years later. There are some documents that haven't been released, and people are still engaged in all sorts of wild speculation about it. And maybe if they have gotten the facts from the get-go, we wouldn't still be arguing about it, what's going to be 60 years later come this November.
Isn't there something about those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it? It seems as if Americans don't learn that lesson. Well, Rick Essenberg, I am so delighted that you joined me this morning. Sounds like whatever you were expecting, the Amazon package that came to your door is now there, thanks to your dog doorbell. But
yes, sorry about that.
It's no problem at all. It's keeping it real, keeping it grassroots. Well, thank you so much. Again, I appreciate all of your team's efforts on behalf of all of us here in Wisconsin and beyond. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.